What's the scariest thing going on in our world right now that not enough people know talk about? There is straight up, actual human slavery that is going on in parts of the world. We've just kind of been collectively uninformed / ignoring it, and it's really fucked. A quiet epidemic. Lyme disease is the fastest growing vector-borne illness in the US. It is an infectious disease caused by the bacteria Borrelia burgdorferi transmitted to humans by the bite of an infected black-legged tick. It is 6 times more common than HIV/AIDS and twice as common as breast cancer. The CDC estimates 300,000 - 1 million people will be infected this year. I urge anyone reading this to educate themselves so that they can protect themselves and their loved ones. Education and awareness saves lives. Kessler syndrome. The sky above us, space, is getting flooded with orbital debris. Some of the pieces aren't even detectable. So those pieces hit satellites, which turns into more debris which hits more satellites. It could just end with no more GPS, signal, research and more. Planes would also be disrupted along with boats due to their communication system. It would take years to recover from this. Not the scariest, but a lot of the people who helped clean up the BP oil spill from Horizon are suffering long-term medical issues. Their case has been essentially swept under the rug. Edit, spelling. Don't ever read about the Hanford site. For about 30 to 40 years after the Manhattan Project, the US government was just straight up pumping nuclear wastewater back into rivers out in Washington state. In the early years the waste was put into aluminum containers then buried with the expectation that after 20 years or so they would come up with a more permanent solution. This was 50 years ago. A lot of nuclear sludge wasn't even given that much consideration and just dumped into trenches. But by the 60s and 70s they started running out of room, so they just started dumping it wherever was convenient. Fast forward to now, where the government is still spending tens of billions trying to clean it up, and while most of the information is still classified, it's known that a couple 100 billion gallons of groundwater is contaminated. There's also the Taylor offshore oil spill in Louisiana that's been putting hundreds of barrels of crude every day into the ocean since 2004. They still don't know how to fix it. Let that sink in. An active oil spill that's been going on for 15 years and no one knows about it. The people that do, don't know how to fix it. The volume will soon overtake Deepwater Horizon as the largest spill ever. Except without public knowledge and outcry we can probably expect this to not get fixed anytime soon. Edit. Originally I had said hundreds of gallons of crude were leaking per day. Current estimates are actually hundreds of barrels per day. Edit. Due to some of the comments I made till linking the WAPO article. I've definitely noticed a decline in the number of bees and monarch butterflies over the years. I used to see hundreds of both every spring. This year I haven't seen a monarch and honeybees is less than 20. It's crazy to see such drastic changes in less than a decade. The sterilization crisis in the medical device industry and how it impacts our access to safe medical products. And on top of that how major companies have been off-gassing toxic ethylene oxide gas that has been causing cancer in people who live next to factories for years and no one gave a shit. When Texas flooded during Hurricane Harvey, there were 13 Superfund sites that got hit. A Superfund site is an area where there are hazardous substances or pollutants on a huge scale. A bunch of chemicals got swept away into those floodwaters and no one will know the effect for years. Edit. First gold and silver thanks kind strangers. My dad is an environmental engineer who worked on several Superfund sites until the government decided it no longer wanted to pay for their containment and just walked away. The scary part is that it isn't some laziness or failure to act. It is simply beyond our financial ability to fix these things. In 1980 there were more than 400,000 toxic waste sites and 500,000 abandoned mines across the US, known simply as Superfund. 400 sites were identified as needing immediate attention and were added to the National Priorities List, or NPL. That number doubled a few years later. There are currently 1337 NPL sites. Plastic. It's everywhere. In our waste. In our food. In our bodies. In our drinking water. Obviously we know it's in the sea. Point sure. Grocery stores are slowly rolling out not using plastic bags, which is awesome. But it's scary how it's taken over everything in our lives. Even in money. We can't stop using it, yet it's building up waste everywhere, and it's causing issues in our bodies with all the microbits we have consumed. Most of the microplastic is coming from our clothing too. It's fucking terrifying. Every time you wash an acrylic or polyester garment, thousands of tiny microfilament bits break off, and washing machines don't have filters to keep them from entering our water system. Unfortunately, most of these pieces are too small to be filtered out by water treatment plants, so they end up in our water. They've discovered this plastic in pretty much every bit of marine life now, plus humans. It's pretty serious and no one knows how to handle it. The best option they've come up with so far are these special bags that you wash your clothing in to catch the particles, so they don't end up in wastewater. That PR, advertising and marketing have infected our minds so much virtually all of people's lives are now about perception manipulation. Changing the way you think about things and how other people think about things. Presenting yourself and your life correctly, saying the right words, parroting the right ideas. We are so self-obsessed we think our perception is reality. We are forgetting that what we think and say is nowhere near as important as what we do. Antibiotic resistance and the overprescribing of them. I don't think this gets talked about nearly enough, and it's already a problem. I remember reading an article recently that said in the future antibiotic-resistant bacteria-related deaths will surpass cancer deaths. It's a vicious cycle. Countless patients/parents of patients hound me to prescribe antibiotics for every single mild illness. I spend much of my clinical day counseling about why they don't need an antibiotic. Only very specific cold-like illnesses truly require antibiotic therapy. Most things like sinus infections and bronchitis are viral and do not need them. However, when I don't write them, I get bad patient reviews, which can lead to a lower annual raise. Therefore, many providers out there overprescribe simply to keep people happy and more money in their pocket. Medical student here. I learned in class that by 2050 infectious diseases will surpass cancer as the second leading cause of death in the US. Also, 70% of all antibiotic use in the US is in raising cattle. The problem is that pharmaceutical companies would rather produce a heart medication that you need to buy for the rest of your life than an antibiotic that you take for a relatively short period of time. Edit. A drug you have to buy for the rest of your life means a lot more profit than an antibiotic that the average person buys from pharmacies maybe once or twice per illness. Edit. Somehow people read my comment and thought I'm just posting this to bash on farm companies. At the end of the day, farm companies are a business and the new drugs they produce are business decisions, not humanitarian ones. There's nothing wrong with that from a business perspective, and that's not the point I'm trying to make. The point is that us voting-aged adults need to start talking about government-led initiatives to produce new antibiotics in order to promote the future well-being of our communities. In the frozen ice of Antarctica there are really old bacteria, older than humans. If the ice melts then those bacteria would release, and since nobody is resistant against them, who knows what's gonna happen. Last night I watched the documentary Dark Money on Amazon Prime. It focuses on Montana as a microcosm of how corporate interests are attempting to wind back the clock to the days when a company could control government. Basically, they look back at the company town mentality of 100 years ago and the model where wealthy business owners could buy an entire legislature and say that's awesome, let's do that. Checks and balances, oversight, journalism, some form of structure that would stave off corrupt practices. They're working towards a paradigm where none of that is active, and democracy is as dead as last year's flowers. Right here in the land of the free. I'm not sure if it's the scariest for the short term, but the death of reality. By that I mean how almost every person giving us information, news, blogs, etc., is fabricating or obscuring the truth for better profits. They understand anger keeps people interested in coming back, and go to disturbing lengths to push for those narratives. Trying to follow a news story most of the time is jumping from hyperlink to hyperlink between different news sites with no originating source to be found. I've seen a TED talk where the speaker openly mocked any sort of critical discourse of his topic that went unnoticed or uncaring. I thought Vice was pretty good, but they also started being openly biased and made me question their authenticity. Unbiased journalism is dying, as far as I can see, and it's rarely discussed. The Argus's real-time surveillance system can fly for months at a time, and has a camera array that can track every moving object even a few inches small in a 36 square mile radius. It streams 6,000 terabytes of footage a day and all of it is processed real-time for asset and target location on the ground. They are used domestically and internationally. If you live in DC, Maryland, or Northern Val, chances are there's at least one tracking you right now and recording all your movements into a threat assessment database. Here's a video documentary of it flying over Maryland and some of the tech behind it.